I heard it argued, specifically in a video by SisyphusRedeemed, that God's absolute knowledge defeats the notion of free will. Basically, if God knows everything that we will do in advance, then despite our feeling of power to make choices, we're not exactly free. Our choices would be predetermined, and one's decisions would be already set in stone, so to speak. However, I will attempt to prove here that this conclusion involves a misconception as to what God's knowledge would involve. For example, just because I can find out what the makers of Gone with the Wind had done to make the film, that fact doesn't mean they didn't freely choose those decisions. Now that the making of the film has passed, I don't believe there's any remakes in the works. It's set in stone, but their decisions back in 1938, 1939 were fluid. Borrowing in part from St. Augustine's notebook, let me add, basically there are three modes of time: past, present, future. However, only past and future can be measured, because if we measure the present, we're already going into the future. And if we think about the present, it's already going back in the past. Time began with creation out of God's eternal present. Whereas everything changes in time, and it's only then that order comes into play. God's eternal creation is constant. Basically, for God, then, past, present, and future are tenses. In other words, God's eternity would involve none of these. Before and after would be inconsequential. God's knowledge would not be dependent on time as ours is. So to use the term foreknowledge in reference to God is a misnomer, since his knowledge would be simply knowledge by definition, absolute. This is comparable to the scenario I mentioned of the film from the past. But with God, not only has he seen it before, he has yet to watch it as well. Imagine knowledge without the limitations of space-time, and that would be God. So our infinite time would be God's eternal moment. His thoughts involve causation in the world, just like our mind causes our bodies to move. Basically, God acts through us as the unity of opposition. External transcendence and internal immanence would be one and the same. This may seem hard to digest and contradictory in part, but think of it this way. If God was dependent on logical laws, he wouldn't be God. Keep in mind, the law of contradiction stipulates time, as in the phrase "at the same time" and "in the same respect." But with God's eternity, time wouldn't apply. Without time, such a law wouldn't be necessary. Besides, God wouldn't need a law of certainty to follow, because God would be certainty himself. So think of a time traveler who goes back in time. She will know what will happen, but hasn't the power to change it despite her foreknowledge. Such would be an instance in which the future is set in stone. Now think of a time traveler who goes back in time and can change things, as her free will traveled back with her. The problem here, though, is that we would be left with two futures instead of one, a contradiction from our perspective. Now think of an all-powerful time traveler who can change things and make that our future if need be. And that would be God. The future is still set in stone in part, but it's fluid in the sense that we freely will it. And God may still intervene at times to answer prayers, etc., to even make it another future if need be, or set into stone any future ad infinitum and even concurrently. In eternity, every possibility is infinite and conceivable, and if every infinite possibility actually exists in some realm, they would all be knowable by the infinite powers of God. And such future in our realm would then become so-called knowledge from our perspective in space-time. So in some possible world, past, present, or future, maybe our world really did destroy itself in a nuclear abyss in 1962. Or maybe world peace was achieved 2,500 years earlier when people began following Socrates' method of inquiry rather than insist on pure opinion, popular or otherwise. Or maybe in some possible world, when Jesus stepped off the mount, people really did begin living according to agape. Any and every possibility is imaginable and valid. Maybe this is what string theory's multi-dimensionality is all about in a literal sense. Also, I should add, free will mainly involves only one choice. Either you decide to focus solely on worldly matters and reject God, or focus beyond such constraints and transcend on some level. Some doubters insist that genetics is the primary influence with such decisions, but this begs a question in regards to physicalism, which is the opposite of spirituality. As you may well have noticed, physicalism too rejects free will as predetermined. So in either extreme, one may argue there is no free will, but I believe I argued in favor of God that only with Him as reason alone would there consistently be free will as well as certainty. Thank you for listening.